The Football Show on Off the Ball.
With Paddy Power. Fake crowd noise? The Emirates never sounded so good. Gamble responsibly. See dunlewy.net.
I'm prepared to do anything I can to play for my country again.
Do it then. What about your start to the game?
It wasn't bad, was it?
Why should it be an honest answer be a mistake?
How can a modern day manager not have a mobile phone?
Why should he?
Yeah, welcome along to Thursday night's football show. It is Richie McCormack here with you. Plenty to cover tonight, including the possible return of the prodigal son, Maurico Pochettino, to Tottenham Hotspur. Martin Lipton will join us a little bit later on to talk about that. But also, we are going to look at matters Italian, because a couple of weeks ago, if you were an Inter fan, things appeared to be more than rosy in your garden. Winning the Serie A title, your first in 11 years, with a record points haul as well. But suddenly, you were without a manager. Antonio Conte walking away yesterday with a nice little check in his back pocket. To discuss this and what's going on as well with the Bianconeri, we are joined on the line by sports writer Nicky Bandini. Nicky, I'm delighted to have you back on the show. We've got a lot of ground to cover this evening, because the managerial merry-go-round in Italy is not so much turning as kind of spinning wildly out of control. We're going to look at what 3 of the top 6 are going to be under new management next year. We're going to have the force of Jose Mourinho coming into Serie A next year as well. But I guess what may have caught a lot of people off guard was the resignation, I guess, yesterday, you'd say, of Antonio Conte. Give us a little bit of backstory behind this, because this seems to have been coming for a while.
Yeah, I was counting up actually just a few minutes ago, and I think it's 7 of the top 10 teams in Italy are going to be changing managers, and not just 3 of the top 6. But Conte is clearly the biggest surprise out of all of them. I think people looking from the outside might have seen this as a total surprise out of nowhere. He's gone and won the league in his second season at the club. He's ended 9 seasons of Juventus dominating Serie A. But actually, for those of us who followed it closely, what's happening in that club, it isn't a complete shock. It certainly wasn't something we knew was going to happen a few days ago, but we knew it was possible, because Stephen Zhang, who is the president of the club, who is the representative of the Suning Group, who are the Chinese company who own Inter, or at least are the majority shareholders in Inter, has been in Italy since just before they tied up the league title, actually, and he has been quite open about the fact at that time that the club needs to seriously cut back its costs. It needs to make savings in the wage bill of about 20% is the figure that's been talked about. And this has been quite a consistent line since he came back to the country, because he's been in China just before they tied up the title. There was conversations with players where they were asked if they'd be willing to renounce basically 2 months' worth of wages, which basically all of them said no to, quite emphatically. And since then, there's been this conversation of, even though Inter just won the league, we knew that they were going to have to do something quite drastic in terms of their cutbacks this summer. It's not even entirely just a choice for Suning, because Suning, as all Chinese companies are, controlled to a certain extent by the requirements of the Chinese central government. And the Chinese central government right now is basically put a block on what is seen as non-essential foreign investments. And a football club that lost 100 million euros on its last year's accounts, that's going to lose more than that this year because of COVID, that's a non-essential investment. So this situation has been brewing, but we didn't know still, of course, how the conversation between Stephen Zhang and Antonio Conte was going to go. Last summer, in fact, they had a sit-down where lots of us thought Conte might leave, and he didn't. This summer, clearly, he said, look, I've won the league. If you can't invest in the club in the way that I think you should, if you can't bring this project forward and give us something to build on, I don't want to be a part of it.
It strikes me as being an odd situation, because Conte has delivered this title amidst this financial turmoil under which the club has been finding itself. There have been stories of players' wages not being paid on time, which kind of paints what Conte has achieved this year in particular all the more remarkable, that he's managed to galvanise a squad who ain't getting paid properly through to a league title and a pretty decent points haul along with it. It strikes me, though, that this Inter situation financial is not purely one born of the COVID situation, that this has been coming again, I guess, prior to lockdown happening in northern Italy last year.
Yes, as I said, last year's accounts, they lost 100 million euros. Since then, they had agreed. I mean, Ashraf Hakimi was not a signing that was done really during the summer. They lined that up last season and then completed it in the summer. But Inter continued to spend effectively last summer window. They also went out and got a number of other players like Alexander Kolarov and Alexis Sanchez, who of course is one that Conte desperately wanted for a long time, on significant wages. So last summer, even after posting a big financial loss, which, sure, the end of last season was affected by the COVID pandemic, but most of it wasn't, they still were prepared to go and spend money, to go and invest in this. But the fact that the club was losing money was there on the horizon. I think there was certainly some expectation that being back in the Champions League might boost some of their revenues. And of course, Inter did go out earlier in that competition than they wanted to. They went out in the group stage. I still think on the pitch, they've done pretty well in terms of that sort of stuff. They did reach the semi-finals of the Coppa Italia. They've won the league. That all generates prize money, but they do seem to have been, and again, it feels like a boring point to come back to. I think it's hard not to look at this in the context of what is happening in China rather than just them as a football club. They have been one of the clubs in Serie A that has been deferring its wage payments as long as they can. There have been measures introduced in Italy to allow clubs to do that to a certain extent, but not all the biggest, richest clubs have been doing it. So they have been deferring wages. They have been delaying payments. No one has been in the dark about the fact that Inter are in a complicated financial position. The players knew it, the staff knew it, Conte knew it. And I think what you said is true. It's remarkable and in some ways almost ironic, because Conte has always been one of these managers who seems to want more. That's not just at Inter, that's at Chelsea, that's at Juventus, it's everywhere he's been. In fact, if you go back to when he left Juventus, that the whole conversation was him saying, you can't expect to shop in a restaurant where it costs €100 to eat with a €10 bill, when he was talking about the Champions League. So he's always been this sort of manager. And yet his best results this season have been the period from January onwards, when Inter became basically unstoppable, when he had no choice but to go back into his squad and, as I put it somewhere else before, basically play with the toys he already had rather than ask for new ones, because Christian Eriksen, Ivan Perisic, these are players who the club had signed who hadn't had a massive impact in the first part under Antonio Conte, who he really got the best out of in the second half of the season. So actually for this season, he did very well in that circumstance of not being able to invest, no signings made in January. But whether or not you want that as a long-term sustainable model is a very different question.
Yeah, particularly when you've won the league, the expectation will be that you build on a winning team. I mean, all the best managers have have gone with that maxim down through the years, and you want to improve on what you have. And he's being told that he has to get rid of 70 million worth of talent during the course of this summer, and maybe trim other wages as well. I think
that's the most striking thing. Sorry, I don't want to interrupt. I just think that's just a striking thing which you just touched on there. The fact that Inter won the league, and within days, a day or two afterwards, Steven Zhang, the president, who's been there giving them all a pep talk beforehand, is talking to players and saying, actually, would you mind giving back 2 months' wages? Even you look at it outside of the player and management perspective, this weekend just gone, Inter finally did the official picking up of the trophy, and there's a huge party outside San Siro, fans in the streets, fans are around his car, cheering the president and saying there's only one president, singing to him. Now he turns around and tells the manager he can't have what he wants. Conte is out, and you've got fans hanging banners outside Inter's headquarters just yesterday or today, I can't remember, but in the last day basically saying, take your responsibility or get out of our club, to Steven Zhang. So the mood for a club that's just won the league, that's just done this for the first time since Jose Mourinho was there, more than a decade, it's an extraordinary way for a title to be followed up, I think.
From about February direction, I'd seen these stories pop up here and there that Inter were looking for a bit of financial aid, I guess. They're possibly looking at getting in loans ranging everywhere from, I think, 150 million to $250 million, depending on where you were reading these things. It seems now that those talks have progressed to something more concrete. And if I'm gauging this right, that the talk of getting a loan to bridge the financial hardship that they find themselves in is kind of with a nod and a wink to potentially selling the club to whomever is actually giving them that loan. Am I misreading that?
I think it's certainly a possibility. It's a fascinating. I keep using that word. It's just such a particular situation that's going on at the club, because I think that Stephen Zhang, who again has been acting in the role of the club president, I think he genuinely is passionate about Inter and has wanted to keep this project in his family, has wanted to continue being the front of it. I think it's something that all of his actions and his behaviours lead you to believe that for him, and of course he's the young heir of the family, he's not the person who's been in charge of the family business for all of this time. For him, this was a passion project as well as something that was part of the family business. But the realities of where they are is they don't have a choice. They don't have the potential to invest in it right now. And yes, they have been trying to do the opposite. They've been trying to get an investment, or at least Stephen Zhang has. Investment that doesn't come with those sorts of ties, investment that doesn't come with any obligation. In fact, investment specifically that they might be able to leverage and use that to go from majority shareholders, which they are now, to 100% control of the club. But it's just not realistic, because they can't offer anything to people right now. They can't offer to be a group who can invest in this situation, who can continue to support it going forward. So whether or not it's explicitly that Suning or indeed Stephen Zhang as an individual want to sell Inter, I think there is some acceptance of the reality that sooner or later, if this situation persists and they're not able to invest, it may well be what happens.
Like, how do they go about getting a manager in this situation to replace Conte? That's the kind of head scratcher for me, because you're kind of looking at who would want to walk into this madhouse. But I guess Inter being Inter, they're not going to be short of applicants. I know Simone Inzaghi is one name that's been linked with possibly heading to the San Siro. Yes, I think it's a really fascinating job. And in fact, just because it's such a neat contrast, another name that has been immediately mentioned with this job, Sergio Conceição, who's the manager of Porto, who has previously been linked very strongly with Napoli, and that those conversations have at least started with Napoli. And you think, which of these two jobs is the more attractive one right now? Because Inter have just won the league. They've got a great squad. They've got so much there. I think without question right now, if you go player for player down Serie A squads, it's Inter and Juventus and everyone else after that. So you take over this group and you get to play in the Champions League, but you know that there's this very heavy, complicated financial situation hanging over you, that the players you've got right now might not be the ones who are there when the season starts. On the other hand, Napoli missed out on the Champions League. So I don't know which of those two situations is more attractive to a manager. Simone Inzaghi is someone who is a fascinating case because he's been at Lazio for a few years now. I think everyone in Italy respects the job he's done at Lazio. I think he's taken them about as far as he can, and this would be a chance for him to take a step up and get a bigger job. Whether he wants to do that is not yet clear. Just yesterday, he went for dinner with Claudio Lotito, the owner of Lazio. They seem to be moving towards a renewal, an extension, a new contract, but until he signs on the dotted line one way or another, there's got to be some temptation for him, because Lazio, with the best will in the world, are not a club set up to win the league. And Inter, even taking a step back from where they are now, if they can retain something, if they can retain some of this core, you'd have to think they have that chance. The one thing that jumped out at a lot of people, and myself included, when I saw that talks were at such an advanced stage as regards Conte talking about his severance package and picking up $7.5 million, I think it is, thereabouts to walk away, was that, he's got a job lined up somewhere else. Do we know, is there a sense of where he might land? Is there a sense of anybody else that might be courting him per se, or is it just he just wants to get out of that situation and then see whatever else might be in front of him?
I think it's definitely the last of those. I think he definitely does not have a job lined up. I understand completely why people would assume that. I understand when you see a manager like that walk away from a situation like that, it's an obvious reaction, but I don't think it's that at all. I think Conte has reached a point in his career, in his personal path, I guess, where he just feels very certain of what he wants and what he doesn't want. And what he did not want was to stay at Inter and have to take responsibility, because I think he wears that responsibility, which a lot of it is self-imposed, of I have to win, of that anything less than first place is unacceptable. He wears that heavily, and he would have felt like staying at Inter with a reduced squad having that responsibility was going to be very hard to manage because he might not have felt he was able to win with the squad that was left after what's been cut back. So I think he's genuinely walked away from this with a mindset that if he has to stay out of football for a year, if he has to spend time living his life away from professional football management, I don't think he's even that upset by that thought. I think he finds the pressure of being a football manager something that clearly he relishes in a big way on one level, but also very draining. And that's why perhaps he hasn't had any job yet so far in his career that's lasted longer than the 3 years at Juventus. Don't forget, at Juventus, he'd won the league 3 years in a row, and he got as far as the beginning of training camp. So they just started preseason training, and on day one, he just walked out because he didn't want that feeling that he had in that moment of the amount of pressure that was on him and the expectations that were on him for the resources that he felt he had available. So I absolutely think he's walked away without a clear idea of what happens next. I think he's prepared to sit out for a while. But, of course, we're right at the beginning of the summer. There are some big jobs available already. There probably will be more as these dominoes knock each other over. Don't rule out that he does show up somewhere, but I don't think he's got something lined up right now at all.
I guess we were in a similar position a couple of years ago when we saw Massimiliano Allegri walk away from Juventus, and we thought that, okay, he's going to walk into any job he wants given what he's done. At Juve, there were talks that he'd been learning English just of his own accord to make himself more amenable, more available to potential suitors in England or somewhere else. And he's bided his time. He's still sitting out, and it looks like he's going to walk back into the job he left, which it seems surprising and then really obvious that this will be the case if Pirlo is to go, that Allegri will be the man that they pick up the phone to call and say, listen, do you want to come back and have another shot?
Yeah, look, it's a safe pair of hands for Juventus. After the last little bit when they've tried with Maurizio Sarri and they've tried with Andrea Pirlo in two different ways to reinvent themselves, in a sense, and neither of those has worked. You could argue that Sarri was more successful than Pirlo. He did win the league at least, but neither of them has created this sort of transformation, this positive rebrand, I guess, that they wanted to have, this idea of Ronaldo and play attacking football and go win the Champions League. It hasn't materialised. So you can look to your recent past and see a manager who just won, who did the things he was supposed to, who actually got you to 2 Champions League finals, which is something that Juventus have not been in the habit of doing and that they've got further away from since he left. I think in that sense, it's an easy decision. And I think perhaps even more than that, what people don't see is the personal relationship behind it as well. Andrea Agnelli, who is the club president and the representative of, again, talking a lot about ownership, but he's the representative of Exor Group, who own Juventus. And I think that's an appointment of a man that he trusts. It's an appointment of someone he knows he can work with, of someone he knows has produced results on the pitch over and over again, and who he will feel a great deal of confidence in that working relationship. So it's an easy choice. It's not necessarily the choice that was the one that everyone thought they would go with. They've been talking to Allegri for a while. This has been going on for weeks behind the scenes, but the possibility of Zinedine Zidane becoming available, and now he has, I think that was on Juventus' radar as well. And I think they might well, if this whole process had played out a bit more slowly, I think it could have wound up going in that direction. But I think Allegri actually was the one who kind of turned around and said, look, we could just do this. We can not sit here in uncertainty through the summer. And I think for both parties, that desire to get on with it and to start planning now, while in fact it's turned out a lot of their rivals are in less certain positions, I think that was strongly appealing to Juventus as well.
I'm not saying Pirlo was a success this year because clearly the table doesn't lie. But if they do want change at that club and if they do want to bring about a new personality to the squad, is it not worth sticking with a manager beyond 1 year, successful or otherwise, that they may be? Because they are looking at them, a team that needs to be in transition. Whether or not they actually are in transition is another story. But you've got a 36-year-old Cristiano Ronaldo who is still the focal point for everything up front. That possibly should be something that they evolve away from, some may argue. But they've brought in some excellent players, like the likes of Weston McKennie I found really impressive this year, and there have been others like young Chiesa, I guess, as well, you could throw into that mix too. That if you put more responsibility and more agency on those players, then you actually will affect the change that you're looking for, rather than relying on the old stagers.
Yeah, look, I think that Andrea Pirlo was probably not up to the task he was set this season. I think it would be, to a certain degree, quite unreasonable to expect him to have been, given that he had done, 9 days in charge of the under-23 side. That was his total management career before he got this job. But I think he was given a very confused brief as well, because he took over this club, as you said, that's been built around Cristiano Ronaldo. You spent 100 million euros to get him, and you're spending more than 30 million euros a year on his salary, several times what anyone else in the whole league makes. And you were explicit when you signed him. Juventus did not dance around this. When they signed Cristiano Ronaldo, they said, we are trying to win the Champions League. Allegri, who was there at the time, said it. Agnelli said it. Everyone said this out loud. It's on record. And they've got further away from that. But Ronaldo is still there. So is your project still that project that you announced when he arrived, to win the Champions League, which you're historically not very good at doing, unfortunately? As good as Juventus have been domestically, Europe has never been their home like it was for Milan when they were on top of the world. But at the same time, Juventus have been trying to do this renovation, this youth project. Matthijs de Ligt in defence, as you mentioned, Chiesa coming in, Kulusevski coming in. The midfield, they've brought in a lot of younger players, and McKennie is one of them. I'm not as convinced that that part of the pitch has been thought through in such a coordinated way, but certainly the idea has been to rejuvenate, moving on players like Baze Matuidi, like Sami Khedira, who've been such an important part of successes in recent times. And eventually you want to move on as well from Chiellini and Bonucci at the back. I don't think that's immediate, but Chiellini, certainly his availability these days is not a lot, and his performances, even when he is fit, are they what they were? I think a lot of people are asking those questions. So there was this confused brief. Are we trying to win now? Are we trying to build something for the future? And I think that Juventus's leadership, their directors, were guilty in a very big way of wanting to have their cake and eat it too in that regard. I think they wanted to do both of those things. So I think one of the fascinating aspects of Allegri coming in is, unlike Pirlo, who really had no power because he is a rookie manager, because you don't have that weight behind the things you say. You can't go to the board and say, I think things need to be this way and that way. He was trying to please everybody. I think Allegri comes back in now with a real position of authority, actually. You tried something else, and in the end you came back to me. So now it's going to be my way or the highway. And I think that's going to be a fascinating dynamic in the months ahead.
What does Pirlo do next?
There's already some reports linking him with other jobs in Italy. Whether or not that will come to be, we'll see. He certainly didn't want to give up the Juventus job. He said it right to the end of his time there. I think I would give myself another season. I think I have earned it, in his opinion. So I think he's still interested in management. Whether or not someone will give him that opportunity right away in Serie A is hard to say. Although, again, there are so many clubs in Italy in the top flight who have parted ways with their managers. There's certainly a lot of vacancies. And when you look at others who've gone before him, players who became managers, whether it was Inzaghi or Seedorf or any number of others, they have tended to get another opportunity. So I expect he'll land somewhere, but I couldn't tell you where yet.
And how worried are Juve about these impending disciplinary proceedings from Juventus? I know the statement put out between them, Barcelona and Real Madrid as a unit earlier on in the week was somewhat defiant, saying UEFA has to change or face decline, etc., and that it's preposterous essentially that they're going to be facing any kind of sanction from UEFA. Is it a live prospect that they could be banned from the Champions League? Is it something they're even considering, or are they just going to swat this away like a bothersome fly?
How the legalities will play out, we're all fascinated to find out, because I can't answer that from a lawyer's point of view. I can tell you that Juventus are bullish. Juventus feel very strongly that they're on strong legal footing, and that this threat of throwing them out of competitions like the Champions League will not stand up to a court challenge, and that it would backfire on UEFA to pursue it. But whether or not that's the case, I'm sure UEFA have a different perspective on. I can only tell you that Juventus as a club are bullish on this, and I don't expect to see them back away from their position, because I suppose actually if you back away from your position, that almost starts to make the case against you, whereas if you are determined in your legal position, then you can argue it in court.
Yeah. Nicky, you mentioned the word yourself a few times. I think the next couple of months in Italy are going to be certainly fascinating, and into the new season and beyond. Nicky Bandini, thank you so much for joining us this evening.
Anytime.
Cheers, take care. There you go. Our football on Off the Ball is with thanks to Paddy Power. For more information on responsible gambling, visit gamblingcare.ie. Talking Spurs and the possible return of Poch after these.
Football on Off the Ball
with Paddy Power. Everything would be better if Wes was back in the team. Gamble responsibly. Gamblingcare.ie.
Yes. Would you like
News Talk's 10K payday.
Yeah, how would you like to be €10,000 richer by the weekend? All this week on News Talk's 10K payday, we're giving you the chance to win €10,000. All you have to do is answer one question, and the money could be in your account by this Friday. To be on the chance to win, just answer this simple question. This week sees the Friends cast back on our screens for a one-off reunion special, but which of the gang was Ross's sister? Was it A, Rachel, or B, Monica? If you think you know, text the word WIN with your answer and your name, of course, to 57599. That's 57599. Text costs €2.50, and you have to be over 18 to enter. Lines close this Friday at 5 p.m, and the winner will be announced on the Hard Shoulder by Kieran on Friday evening. News Talk's 10K payday. Find out more at newstalk.com. One man who could be in for a series of pretty nice paydays over the course of the next while is Maurico Pochettino, who appears to be at least considering a return to Tottenham Hotspur after 18 months away. To discuss this, we're joined on the line by Martin Lipton. Martin, good evening to you.
Good evening.
Martin, we mentioned it with Nicky just before the break when we were talking about Max Allegri possibly going back to Juventus after just over a year away, that it seems the most surprising and the least surprising thing in the world. Similarly, there's an air of this about Pochettino, and this story broke last night. I think a lot of people would have gone initially, wow, that seems a little bit odd, and then the more they thought about it, it seems more to make more sense. What's your read on it, and how far are these talks down the line, do we know?
Well, they're certainly progressing. Whether they go the full hog is less clear at this stage. There seems to be an interest in Pochettino's part. He certainly hasn't batted it away, which you thought he might have done if he was really interested in staying at PSG. Now, of course, he could be using this interest to further his ambitions in Paris. That's possible. He could be using it to smoke out other interests elsewhere, perhaps from Real Madrid. But Daniel Levy needs to get a manager in quickly, needs to get someone he can work with, needs to have someone who can get the fans back on side. And I suspect that Pochettino, if available, would fit and tick all of those boxes.
When they made the move to oust Jose Mourinho, was Pochettino even a consideration for them, do we know?
I wouldn't have thought so at that point, other than because he wouldn't have been considered gettable. Remember, at that stage, he was still in the Champions League semi-finals with PSG, expected to win the title as well and potentially win the Champions League. Things have changed over the past 2 months, haven't they? So it is a fast-evolving situation. I think that they were looking at Julian Nagelsmann as their first choice, and he obviously has now gone to Bayern Munich. They looked at Ten Hag, who's signed a new contract at Ajax, but might be more gettable than others. They've looked at plenty. Typical Spurs, I guess, to sack a man and then reappoint him 18 months later. But you can't discount it at the moment.
This is what I'm thinking. And even looking at the Pochettino situation, like you mentioned the names there, like Eric Ten Hag, Julian Nagelsmann has been around. I mentioned as well, suddenly Antonio Conte becomes a live prospect, given the fact that he's walked away from Inter in the past 24 hours too. but they do seem to be all over the map in terms of the kinds of managers that they are. And I'm wondering, is there any unified approach to how Spurs are going about this? Because from the outside looking in, there doesn't seem to be.
Well, I think you can see a sort of common thread in Nagelsmann and Ten Hag and Pochettino, which is relatively young, attractive team building, looking to play the right way. I think if they'd gone for somebody like Conte, where it's all about winning, and out of the Mourinho mould, you would argue that would be more of a an all over the place, no certainty about the way they're looking to do things. If the profile of those three is more similar, I'd argue.
How much of a consideration is Harry Kane's future in this appointment?
I don't know. If they think that Pochettino is the man to keep Harry Kane, then that makes sense. I don't think Kane would have stayed for Nagelsmann or Ten Hag specifically. But if the view of Daniel Levy, which is what I'm hearing, is that unless someone offers £200,000, we're not going to sell at £200 million rather, we're not going to sell anyhow. That is less of a relevance. I think if giving Pochettino the job makes it easier for Kane to recommit for 12 months and not kick up a fuss, that might be an element, but I don't think it's the prime one. I just think it would be a happy coincidence.
Yeah, Kane seems to be, like, he hasn't explicitly said it out loud, but he's hinted enough to suggest that a move away would be his preferred option, rather than talks with Daniel Levy this summer bringing about a convincing argument that Spurs are going to be challenging for top trophies next season, or maybe in the season beyond that, but it's definitely heading in the right direction. But the sense seems to be that he is angling for a way out, and I'm not sure if any manager would want somebody there who doesn't want to be there if Daniel Levy's going to play hardball.
Yeah, but you know that if Kane doesn't get his move, he'll just knuckle under and score 40 goals next season, won't he? Yeah. He's not the sort to kick up a fuss. It's not in his nature. He wants to play football. He wants to score goals. He wants to. I suspect he might be the new captain of Tottenham if he were to stay, and captain England up to the World Cup and probably through to 2026 World Cup, given the chance. So he's not the sort of player who's going to down tools. Very few do, in truth. They might moan about it. Look at, and Levy will say, well, look what happened with Modric. He wanted to go. He was desperate to go to Chelsea. We wouldn't sell, and he gave us probably our best season he had at Tottenham. The year after, when he was up to deadline day, he was banging on the door asking for a move.
Still worked there pretty decently. From Spurs' point of view, like, what has been the overall judgment on this season? Because I guess the Kane talk has clouded a lot of discussion of where Spurs actually are at the end of this season. Like, everything has been, filtered through the conical that is Harry Kane, and suggesting that, the be all and end all is keeping him. But there's a lot of surgery required on that squad, you would figure, going into next season.
No, absolutely. They were shambles for most of this season. They got away with it because they had three strikers who scored goals. If you look at the three of them, Kane's got 23 in the league, Son's got 17, and Bale's got 11. That's 51 goals. That's 3/4 of the goals they scored this season from three players. They were shedding goals too easily. They didn't have a right back. They didn't have a centre half they could trust. They ran the legs off of Højbjerg. They were a mess in many ways. There was a lack of creativity outside those front three. There was a lack of conviction about the way they played. You could argue that they've actually exceeded expectations or reality by coming as high or as low as seventh. And in fact, if they'd beaten Aston Villa in that penultimate game, they'd have ended up sixth. And likewise, if Lanzini hadn't lashed that one in the 93rd minute to get a 3-3 draw for West Ham, they'd have finished sixth. That's how close it was, because that was 1 point more for West Ham and 2 less for Spurs. They didn't deserve to finish any higher than they did. They were lucky to finish where they did, in truth. And they've sneaked into a European spot, which is not massive money, but it still probably adds up to 15 million with the coefficient element to it as well. And more importantly, it gets some coefficient points going forward, which they will need if they get back into Europe. They got away with it without question this season, no more than that.
Is there a sense that even without a Kane sale, there is money to spend this summer?
Well, there have to be. I mean, people look at the money they owe, and they do owe a lot of money, 175 million to the government, plus the money on the stadium. But the stadium only costs them £17 million a year. Now, they get £6 million through the door every home match with a full stadium, plus, depending on how much they make on concessions. They are going to get 150 million each year from the Premier League, etc. They're not in a desperate spate. Their Spurs shirt sponsorship is worth 50 million a year. They've got all the other sponsors. They're still going to, in a decent year, they get 450 million pounds through the door. And remember, when you buy players, you only amortise them over the length of the contract. So it's a set 5-year deal. On the books, at least, it costs you what that does divided by 5, whereas you get full value for any players you sell. I think they'll sell Ndombele. I think this summer, try and get some money back for him. They'll sell Sanchez, probably sell Lloris. That's even in a deflated market. That's the thick end of 80 million quid through the door.
It is, and there's others that you could like. I'm trailing through the squad here. There's the likes of Aurier, who you would figure is on the way out. I'm not shoving him out the door, but Toby Alderweireld is 32 and kind of showing signs of it. And then you've got others in and around that squad like Giovanni Lo Celso, who he's been a constant, might be decent player for Spurs, but looks like he'll be one of those never will be for them. Dele Alli as well is a constant ponderance for them as regards where he is in his own head. What's the sense around Ali this summer? Is he somebody they might look to cash in on, or is it somebody they want to rehabilitate and get him back to the form that he was in, say, 3-4 years ago?
Well, given they decided not to sell in January when they might have done, I think the view is that they can turn him into a player again. And of course, Pochettino is the one who built him as a player, and if they were to get him back, it would make it more viable, you would think, for him to come back to the play. But there were moments last season, at the end of the season, when he started to look like a player again. A couple of games he played extremely well. I don't think anyone could pretend that he hasn't had a disappointing season. He himself has conceded it was the toughest of his career, and he was poor at times, and he wasn't in the side for reasons. There's still a football player there, there's no doubt about that.
And on the Bale situation, is there any kind of real talk that they want to extend this loan deal beyond what they've had, or are they happy enough to let him trudge back to Real Madrid and play some more golf in the middle of Spain?
I think that the best deal for everyone is him to come back to Spurs for another year, because Madrid get him off their, if not off their books, at least partially off their books, goes to a club where he's confident and happy. And 11 goals last season. I think it's the highest, the best rate of non-penalty goals in the Premier League per minute. Not that it says a great deal, but it is a stat that you can hang on. When he's fit, he's still an outstanding player, isn't he? He showed that just in that last game when he came on against Leicester. What he did when he ran at them, they couldn't get close to him.
Yeah, he's looked a brilliant player actually in the second half of the season. It looked like we've seen flashes of the Gareth Bale, I guess, that when he was at his peak at Real Madrid, or even in his last year or two at Tottenham, there are little flashes of that towards the end of the season. Yeah,
I think so. The goals started to flow, didn't they? Yeah. I mean, it wasn't as prolific as they would have wanted, and he struggled. I still think that's a legacy of the injury problems and the lack of activity over the last 18 months. When he started to play more regularly, you could see Bale becoming Bale and taking wing, and I think that's what they were looking for. He's not going to start 38 games in a league season next season, but he might be available to start 30.
Which in and of itself can prove pretty handy. Somebody who's been in and out of the team, of course, this season too was Matt Doherty. Looking at it from our green-tinted spectacles, hasn't been a great first season for him, let's be honest, at White Hart Lane.
And I wouldn't be shocked if there wasn't a second season for him at White Hart Lane.
Really?
I think if they could get even 2/3 of their money back, they probably would. It's not worked. For whatever reason, it simply hasn't worked. Doherty, I'm sure, would admit that. It's not been a disaster, but it's not been a million miles short of that, has it? If we're being brutally honest. He's failed to get into the team. They've ended up picking Tanganga as a centre-half ahead of him at right-back on occasion. Aurier, who they wanted to get rid of all of last year, has been ahead of him. He's just not done it.
When you say not done it, what exactly has he lacked? Has he kind of been a victim of the chopping and changing of systems, of Mourinho kind of initially fancying him and then very much not? Or is it just a form issue? Give us a sense of what's gone wrong for Matt Doherty there.
I thought from day one he didn't look right. That opening game of the season against Everton, he was disappointing, wasn't he? He seemed to be a player lacking conviction and lacking self-belief. I know not why. The player they thought they were buying was an attacking wing-back stroke full-back who would hurt teams and deliver, and it simply didn't happen. How many goals has he been responsible for? How many assists? Far too few. And, the way they were playing, they needed their full-backs to be critical members of the team in an attacking sense. And unfortunately, Doherty wasn't a critical member of the team in either attacking nor a defensive sense.
Is there a sense that Spurs is, I guess, too big a club for him? That maybe Wolves is the perfect scenario for him, given that he came up through the leagues with them, managed to get them promoted and be a nice central cog, albeit out in the wing, for a fairly middling team. But you go to Tottenham Hotspur and it's a completely different kettle of fish.
Well, you're a better judge, and your listeners are better judges of Doherty's character than I, because I haven't seen enough of him to determine what sort of boy he is. What I have seen is that he doesn't seem to be able this season to cope with the burden of expectation. That doesn't mean he's beyond him. There have been plenty of players who struggled in year 1 and year 2 and suddenly, taken off in year 3 and 4. It isn't inconceivable. But at the moment, if you were to ask me, would I be shocked if he was sold this summer? The answer would absolutely be no, if someone wants to take him.
A Lloris exit would be slightly more surprising, though, for some.
Sorry?
A Lloris exit, as you touched on there, would be slightly more surprising for some.
Well, only because he's been there since 2012. He's been there for 9 seasons. If you want to make Kane captain, you've got to take it off Lloris. You don't take it off Lloris if Lloris is no longer there. PSG might fancy him, Marseille might fancy him, Lille, whomever, somebody else might fancy him. And that might be a way to alter things. That I'm not looking to get rid of Lloris, but I can see that there might be some vestigial value in him as well in the market, and you can get a goal. The one thing that caveats that is I think the Spurs will definitely look at Nick Pope, and he's now out of commission till some point into next season because of the surgery, which might change things again. But then also they could look at Johnston from West Brom, who will be relatively cheap to get.
Given the churn of players that's going to be involved now this summer, it looks like whether it is Pochettino or somebody else, it's a massive job for them.
I think it needs to be done as well. Too stale. You petrify her up, Luke, now, as someone once wrote. That was Heaney, I think. Or was it Yates? One of the two. Anyhow, but it was that they are stuck in the mud. They need to change. And that means, I think, a significant rewriting of the squad. Just to make things different. If you look at the first Pochettino year, he made a lot of changes very quickly, sized up the squad and got rid in that first 12 months. A similar job is required now.
I'm just curious, I don't want to lean on that maxim of never go back, but I'm just wondering what's changed from those last 6 months where he was in charge, where things went pretty badly wrong after the Champions League final, to whereby he's suddenly their saviour. There's a big mental leap required there, I guess, for some people.
I think you need to get rid of the players. The issue I always thought at the time, it was either Pochettino went or the players went. The easiest one is to get rid of the manager. They actually should have got rid of the players, or a lot of them. That now needs to be done. If there was any doubt about that, that has been ended. Whether you can get rid of them all in one fell swoop is more difficult, I would argue. But if you keep enough players who like and fancy and back Pochettino, the new ones will come on board as well. What you can't have is the same group of stale players. That's a recipe for disaster.
Clearly, when he went, the ties and the relationship with Daniel Levy wasn't that badly hurt, if he's considering coming back or if it's even a proposition at this stage.
Well, clearly, I think by that point, even Pochettino felt it was time to go. I think it was a blow to his pride, but I think he recognised that he needed a break, that it wasn't working, they weren't listening. Clear the air. In an ideal world, you'd have given him 6 months paid leave to come back in the following summer. It doesn't really work like that in football, does it?
Maybe it's something we should probably try and investigate from here on in, because if you look around the continent, it seems to be happening plenty.
Well, sabbaticals seem to be the way in. I think it's an option. Managerial sabbaticals. It's not working. Come back in June.
Yeah.
I've not seen it before, but maybe that's a path that clubs should consider.
Well, it's something that I don't think we've seen in exact name, but it's definitely, you look at the Zidane case at Real, you can look at, I guess, what Allegri's about to do at Juventus, and I guess Pochettino now too. Take 6 months, go and clear the head, we'll sort out the personnel situation, come back in and we'll go again.
I'm not opposed to it conceptually. If it works in business, why shouldn't it work in sport when sport is a business?
Exactly. I think we've brought about a new phenomenon.
Sorted it. We've done it.
We sorted it. Football. Brilliant. We can close up shop. Football show is done, and we will never have the likes of Martin Lipton on ever again. Joking, of course. Martin, thank you so much for joining us.
For which we'll all be grateful, I suspect.
Go away with that. Thank you so much for joining us tonight, Martin, and we'll look on with great, I guess, interest in what's going to go on at Spurs over the next couple of months. Martin Lipton, thanks so much.
Cheers.
Don't forget, football on Paddy Power is with thanks to, or football on Off the Ball is with thanks to Paddy Power. For more information on responsible gambling, visit gamblingcare.ie.
Off the Ball
with Paddy Power. Only the cream of the crop pick up Champions League medals. Jonathan Greening's got one. Gamble responsibly. Gamblingcare.ie.